Welcome to the Kentucky Workers' Compensation Podcast with Ched Jennings of the Jennings Law Offices. This is a free resource for people who actually work for a living. Ched is going to provide information to help you file for and maximize benefits for injured workers. If you're ready, let's talk about Kentucky workers' comp and related issues. All right, friends, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. And Ched Jennings, this is a great episode because you're going to introduce a client here in just a few minutes, but I really want to kind of tell that story. For those of you who don't know Ched, Ched and I have been good friends for many years, and he has represented people all across the state of Kentucky in workers' compensation. Ched, tell me a little bit about your practice.
Well, we have for many, many years. This is my 45th year of practicing law in Kentucky, and I've focused my practice on helping injured workers who sustain injuries while working. And it's been very good for me. It gives me a lot of satisfaction to help these injured workers. Most of the litigation involves fighting insurance companies and employers, and I've always enjoyed that, helping the little person actually get what they're entitled to, what the law says they're entitled to. But we have a system now in workers' comp, which some people have attitudes that what they don't pay out, they get to keep, and that's not appropriate.
Well, especially when somebody's working hard for a company and they're showing up on time, they're doing the best they can for the company, putting up with all the stuff that comes along with that, and then suddenly they get hurt, and the company at sometimes leaves them out in the cold, more or less.
Well, that's what's so rewarding, because for the most part, they have their income stopped. They worry about what they're going to be doing, how they're going to provide for themselves, their families, and there's nothing worse than not being able to get up and go to work. And that, unfortunately, is what happens with many people that have the work injuries. And I've always called it a partnership, which I think is good. There's three important players in a workers' comp claim. Everybody should have the goal of trying to do what they can to have the injured worker recover and then be able to go back to work and to still have a productive work life. And what's important, the three partners in that are the employers, the injured worker, and the doctors. And if any one of those three in that partnership aren't really working hard to that goal, then you've got problems. You have to have a motivated employee, injured worker who wants to get back to work. You want to have an employer who wants to help them get back to work. And then you have the medical providers, the doctors who treat. You want to make sure they're given the best care and are able to help return these injured workers to the workforce.
Now, Kentucky's workers' comp system is state-specific, right? The stuff that you and I might talk about today with your guest here, with your client, doesn't necessarily pertain to Tennessee or Indiana or somewhere else, right? So workers' comp is state-specific.
It is, and although being in Louisville area, I do some cases across the river in Indiana, the bulk of my practice is helping people who get hurt in Kentucky, and the law is designed by the Kentucky General Assembly and signed by the governor, and that's where we have rules, we got regulations and statutes, so it is state-specific.
But if I live in Indiana or, say, Tennessee or Ohio, and I'm injured in Kentucky, I can still file potentially a Kentucky workers' comp claim.
Yes, and in fact, if injury occurs here in Kentucky, you have a right to file in Kentucky, even if you are from another state and your employer is in another state. If you happen to be passing through Kentucky or doing a job in Kentucky and get hurt, that qualifies you to file a claim for workers' compensation benefits in Kentucky. And often, the benefits in Kentucky are better than what they would be in the other state or the state where they might live or where they may be employed.
And so that's the best thing about this system is that it doesn't cost them anything to contact you. So if somebody is listening to this podcast and saying, hey, yeah, you know what, either I live here in Kentucky, I've been injured, or somehow there's a Kentucky connection, I want to see if I qualify, they should probably reach out and just call the Jennings Law offices, I would think.
Yeah, we're very good about trying to address telephone calls when people call and to answer their questions, and we'll tell them what we think based upon what they've told. What we try to then do is to have an in-person meeting to not only interview the injured worker, but also to discuss strategy and explain things about the Kentucky law, which a lot of people don't recognize and realize. But if you get hurt in Kentucky, you have the right to pick your doctors for treatment.
And that's a big deal.
That's a big, big deal. A lot of times the company and the insurance companies tend to send you to their doctors, or they want to send you to those doctors. And I call those the company doctors. When in reality, you want to basically pick the doctor that's going to have your best interest, trying to help you medically instead of sending you back to work without restrictions.
That makes a lot of sense. And friends, if you'd like to learn more about that or hear more of these podcasts, I invite you to visit the Jennings Law Office's website, which is just jenningslawoffices.com. You can find all sorts of information on there. You'll have videos. You'll have all sorts of resources that will make that really easy. Ched, if somebody just wants to pick up the phone, what is the best phone number they should use?
Well, I actually I give out two numbers. One is my office number, 502-583-3882, and I also give out my mobile number, 502-876-5557.
Perfect. And friends, if you're listening to this, when you look at the podcast that you're listening to, there's usually a whole bunch of paragraphs just below the actual player. I call those show notes, and I will have in there a link not only to Ched's website, but also those phone numbers as well for you. So, Ched, at the outset of this episode, I said, hey, I'm really excited about this because this is really a great episode to talk about. We've got one of your clients. Why don't you kind of set up the conversation, and then we'll introduce your client.
Well, Jazmin, I'm very pleased that she gave me a call because she sustained a very serious injury. And she's still young. She has her full life and full work activities ahead of her. And I think it's really important to see, and we all did in this particular case, she sustained a very serious injury that she still needs treatment for. We're protecting her rights to basically be able to get future medicals. That's in place. We are protecting her rights in a way that we've settled it for a very good amount. I'm not going to get into the sums, but at the same time, one of the things we did was to set up an annuity which is going to pay her dollars each month and it's guaranteed for 20 years.
Right,
and that's significant.
And I do want to talk to you about that later on in this episode because that's something that a lot of people don't realize is an option. And that growth, that money is tax-free, which is another big benefit. So let's come back to that.
Well, Jazmin, which really, I want to kind of, and she'll be able to attest to this a little bit. When she got a hold of me, she was getting bumped around. I wish in workers' comp we had a window, a door where somebody could go without any hassles to basically get their benefits that they're in need, entitled to, medical benefits for sure, disability benefits for sure. And that was difficult in her case. And I'm not trying to champion that necessarily, but at the same time, that was one of the reasons why she reached out to find an attorney. So when I talked with her, and we then got together and talked about things, I think there was a connection, which I think is important. I think she saw everything I was willing to try to do to help her with her case and also explain to her what the playground was like, so to speak, and also what her rights are and what our goal would be. And I think for the most part, we reached our goals. We had a very, very good financial settlement for a very serious injury, and her life now will start to quiet down a little bit, and she'll be able to press forward with the rest of her life, her work life for sure.
Outstanding. Well, Jazmin, welcome to the studio. I'm glad you're joining us on the podcast today. Obviously, if we go back to when the injury happened, obviously when you woke up that morning, you had no idea your life was getting ready to change. Kind of walk us through kind of what was going on, what kind of work you were doing, and kind of what happened.
Hi, I'm Jazmin. Well, like you said, I woke up that day. And like any other day, I worked night shifts, so it was 12 hours.
Wow.
And clocked in like every other normal night. Started working. Come to say, like around lunchtime, it was time to normally give out breaks like we do to our packers. And I'm not really a packer. My job there was mostly operator, so I worked on big, heavy machinery, making sure that they would run those 12 hours until we would give it to the next shift.
Right. And then so you're halfway through your shift, and all of a sudden the injury occurs.
Right.
What was going through your mind at that point? Obviously you were in pain. Obviously you needed to get to the hospital.
Right.
But as that happened, kind of what was going through your mind?
To be honest, like I said, I didn't know it was going to happen. Just it's something I'm used to running newer lines, and it's normally on the other side. But on that night, they had me work on older line, lines that are really, really old.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't really expecting to go there that night because I don't like those lines, But there's always been problems. We've always told maintenance about it, but they like to put bandages on it and say it's fixed.
Right.
And the line just stopped working, so we do our regular routine, put it in the grinder, lock everything out, make sure that nobody's around there. Well, when to fix it, and that's when the accident happened. I didn't expect it. Didn't expect people to be around me. They're like family, fiance, and everybody just freaking out. And I'm just trying to keep my posture, even though I'm trapped in there. So I'm like, yeah, a couple screams, crying, but trying to not pass out, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's basically what me being strong there for my family.
One thing I wanted to pass along to the listeners, and Jazmin can attest to this, because, you know, a lot of times people get concerned that they may have been at fault. Mm-hmm. They may have been contributorily negligent or caused the problem or not, and they think, well, I can't get any benefits. And we have a no-fault system in Kentucky. It's not who was at fault, how they were at fault, trying to prove the company didn't do certain things, didn't maintain the equipment. It has nothing to do with it. What we focus on, did the injury occur? And that's what the benefits, that's what the law in Kentucky is. So there was no question that she got hurt. They weren't challenging that it was a work-related injury. They knew it was. And that's what was important. And I think everybody should understand that you don't have to shoulder the blame or shoulder any of the negligence or at all. It's no fault.
Yeah. Jazmin, let me ask you this. So, I mean, obviously you're in the hospital, I would think, and you've got a whole bunch of stuff going through your mind. I mean, you're worried about, you know, how's this going to work out? How's this going to play out? At some point, you got a hold of Ched. How did you go through that process? How did you find Ched? Kind of.
Well, like I said, after the accident had happened, the person that they had to call was my stepdad, and he just immediately drove there. I didn't even know how long it took him to drive, probably 5 minutes to get from a 20-minute place. But that's like another thing. I learned all the things I need to know from my work of working there for like 2 + 3 years. Everything I need to know from him. He's been my boss. He was the person that taught me everything about machinery, from the ups and downs, how to get every single bolt done. And like I said, once I woke up again in the hospital, because I kept passing out every now and then, my mom showed up over there. So she kind of started discussing with all the with people that work in the hospital. It's like Ched said, you can pick out your own hospital, which is good. And the person that helped me find Ched was my dad, which is after I had a house fire, I went to live with my dad, and he was telling me, why don't you call this lawyer, this lawyer? I'm like, And then he was like, Ched Jennings. And I was like, I gave Ched a call, and like I said, we had a connection there. And I knew that he would be able to help me out with everything I needed without me having to worry about anything.
That must have taken a lot of that pressure off of you, at least
Definitely.
in the moment, right? And then so, obviously, this is not something that happens very quickly. I mean, the law takes a while. The case takes a little while to develop. You obviously have to go through medical treatment and things like that. What was it like working with Ched in the Jennings Law Office? Can you describe that for us?
It was great, actually. I would, whenever I needed to call him, basically anytime, morning, afternoon, night, he would always call back or just pick up the phone right when I needed him, you know.
Did that surprise you?
It did, actually, because not everybody does that. But I'm actually very glad with the work he's done for me. He's always been there for me whenever I needed something. He's basically been there through my ups and downs, too.
Yeah, it's got to be an emotional journey.
Oh, I mean, it's definitely. But like I said, he's always there for me when I need him.
And Ched, I mean, obviously, you've handled many, many, many workers' compensation cases. And sometimes, the temptation is, well, this is just like every other case. But you approach it a little differently, I would think.
Well, I try to treat everybody like their family, like they're my sister, my daughter, my father, my mother, whatever. And so when I look at basically setting it up, I want to practice it as if I'm representing family. So I may do a little bit more in a case because if they're like family, you spend a little more time developing evidence, proof. And then when we get time to settle it, or if we go into mediation, what we basically do is I look at it like, again, this is family, and it's got to be fair, and it's got to be something that's good. I know I'm going to see Jazmin and talk with her again on this case, but there's going to come a point in time where I'm not going to be seeing her, talking to her as much, and I want to know that she basically got not only a fair settlement, but it did help her get back to productive work, productive life, and that she's able to just to enjoy life as much as possible. And it is a big difference when they are able to get their workers' compensation benefits, which, by the way, the law provides. I mean, everything I got for Jazmin, I can point to the law of Kentucky saying she's entitled to this, but between the injury and getting that settlement done, she has all these issues that are the insurance, the adjusting of the cases, the payments, treatment, all these things that come in, and it's worth it to really spend the time to make sure things get to be right, and that's what's fair, and that's what's important and has been with her case. So it's been very rewarding for me to represent Jazmin.
Well, and that's, we've made reference to the settlement, and without getting into the numbers, obviously, I'm assuming it's a pretty significant number. At the outset of this episode, you mentioned something about a structure or about an annuity. Kind of, would you all mind talking about that and why you chose to go down that road? Jazmin, why you thought that might be a good idea? Ched, maybe you can just kind of summarize what it is, and then we'll kind of get into it, because this is kind of unique.
Well, the annuity market is neat in many respects, because if you do it right and settle it right, and that's what I want to tell is very, very important. It has to be structured right. The documents need to be signed right. And what it is that workers' compensation benefits are not taxable. They are untaxable and non-taxable. And so when she gets this money in, and when she received the lump sum for this case that we've also just provided to her, it's really good in that it's all tax-free. So you have to look at it from that standpoint. So when you go out to buy an annuity, the important thing is that the insurance company has to pay the annuity insurance company directly. It's not something that flows through my office. We don't sign for it. We don't run it through my escrow account, but it's from the insurance company, and that's what's required by the IRS to make sure you keep it tax-free. So what we did, we took a sizable lump sum settlement and purchased an annuity for Jazmin that's going to provide her with a guaranteed income. And what that means is that if something happens to her, then it goes to her estate. And we were able to set it up for it, and I'm not going to try to get into terms, but a good amount of money per month for the next 20 years. And it really is good in that respect, because she'll get a monthly check that's tax-free, and then she can do whatever work she can, and it supplements her income. And that's what the purpose of the Workers' Comp Act is to get it. And I fully expect Jazmin will probably want to try to go to school and learn a little bit of a trade that try to help her be employed, and which I think she is, and employable. And I think it's really important. I know she believes that and feels that she wants to do that. And I just think overall, hopefully 20 years, she'll look back on this as good of a settlement that we possibly could get, as well as one that she's happy with.
Right.
Jazmin, this has to be, again, a weight off your shoulders, because I know if I were to get a sizable check like that, it's like, I don't know what to do with this, and I don't know, how do I make it last, and all this. I mean, are you comfortable with how that worked out? I mean, do you like the idea of the structure like that?
Of course, I do. Like I said, I've always liked working, so ever since the accident, I really don't like just sitting at home, waking up and just doing the same routine. I've always been a hands-on person and just like to work. And I mean, it is, a very good check, but like Ched was saying, I would like to go back to school and finish what I was doing and be able to graduate and go from there.
Outstanding. And Ched, with the settlement, the structure, the annuity that you put together, that's not a requirement, right? That is something the client says, I'm either interested or not.
Well, it's true, and I explained everything to Jazmin before we did it, to make sure that it met with her approval and her interest. And it's not necessarily the best option for every case, but it's something to be considered with the more serious cases, and ones where you want to be interested, and the judges need to also approve the settlements. And it really looks good to a judge when he sees that an injured worker is going to have a guaranteed income for 20 years, and it meets all the criterions of the Kentucky Workers' Compensation Act, which is important. It's delivery of medical care, delivery of disability benefits, but also a speedy resolution of compensation matters. And so you want to look at it as to the fairness And the judge signed off on this, agreed to it, and everybody's pleased.
That sounds like a good setup. That sounds like a good setup for everybody. I mean, because ultimately, the whole idea here is to try to make the injured worker whole again and enable them to move forward as best they can.
Exactly, and I try to tell everybody that, you know, your thought process before an injury is different than what it is after an injury, and the reason for that is you've traveled now in shoes that have taken you through some bad times, and so your perspective of life, perspective of where you want to be, how you want to be, who you want to be with, what type of work you want to do, what type of work you don't want to do. And you're able to basically plan for the rest of your life. And that's what's important. This is kind of a bridge. Workers' comp is supposed to compensate you for your losses. And there's a lot of words that are used, but bottom line is that where do we want to get? We want to get where Jazmin wants to get. She's talked about where she wants to get. And what I've been able to effectively get for her and provide for her is the bridge to that. And at this point in time, it permits her the financial stability to basically be able to get some of the retraining and take care of going on with figuring out what she wants to do with the rest of her life. And I also want to point out one thing, and we weren't really going to talk about money, but a lot of people don't realize this, and I think this actually shocked Jazmin as well, but the maximum fee that I can charge in any case, or any attorney can charge you in a workers' compensation case in Kentucky, is $18,000. And this case was six figures, and the fee's only $18,000. So it makes a big difference. I don't turn over a lot of cash where it's that sense like a car accident is.
Right.
It's basically a capped fee, and that makes it also more rewarding.
Well, and that's what I really admire about how the system was set up here in Kentucky, is that the majority of those benefits, those funds, are supposed to go to the injured worker, not the attorney, not the insurance company, not the doctors. It's there to help the injured worker, and that's the way it ought to be.
Actually, it was designed back in 1912, and it was designed for injured workers. Okay, it was designed to provide protections to injured workers, to provide early delivery of benefits, medical care. I mean, it used to be back then that somebody would have to go to circuit court, file a lawsuit for a workers' comp injury, and back then they had contributory negligence. So if the jury would find you at least 1% contributory negligence, it was a bar to any recovery.
So if the jury said, no, you were just the slightest bit responsible for your own accident or your own injury here, you get nothing.
So what ended up happening was, and if you really think about this, Jazmin, and you go back on it, who would have paid for that hospital bill you went to? You'd have to wait 2 or 3 years letting it go through courts, and who would have given you those disability benefits that you received? You know, so there was some exchange, and labor and management got together and said, hey, let's have a system where injured workers gets an early delivery of benefits, and if there are issues, that there's a speedy resolution of the compensation matter. And the only reason this case was delayed at all was that Jazmin had to recover. And it wasn't like in 3 months. It took a while. And she still has some more medical treatment that she's entitled to, that they're going to pay for. It's just a question of getting the case to the point where it's time to settle it, and that's what we've done.
Outstanding. Jazmin, since the moment you walked into the studio, you've had this big smile on your face. I mean, you're a young woman. You've got a new start here. Tell me about the future. What does the future look like for you? What do you think you'll do?
To be honest, the first thing I want to get is a house. Finally, to me, I mean, yeah, it's a big amount of money, but I don't really care about size. I just want a place where I can call home. To me, I would be okay with a 2-bedroom, small house, a lot of land, because I have animals, so... After that, like I said, finish off with my school, help out my family with whatever they need, even if it's medical or school, because it's always been like that for me. Family's important. We always got to stick together. The same way they've been there for me, I'm going to be there for them. Same with my fiance. When I had the accident, she didn't walk away or anything. She was there for me, showering, feeding me, trying to learn, having patience with me.
Trying to use the other hand and
it was a big impact, Not really. You don't really have find a person that's going to stick with you on the ups and downs, especially at a young age like me.
Yeah.
I'm 26, you know? So, like, I really appreciate everybody that's actually been there for me. Same with Ched. He's been there through the ups and downs.
There's probably been a lot of them. I mean, this is a devastating. Again, when you woke up that morning, you had no idea life was getting ready to change. Good news for all of us is that it changed for the better. It sounds like. So I'm real happy for you. Real excited. I gotta ask. And obviously, it's kind of come through in how you've described things. But looking back on it and having been through this with the Jennings Law offices, would you recommend Ched to other people? And if so, why?
I would recommend Ched to anybody because, like I said, the first time I called him, we got to the point where we made a connection, and I knew that he was going to be there for me whenever I needed him, even if it was late at night or early in the morning. If I needed help with anything, he would always pick up the phone and be like, "This is Ched."
That's awesome.
And that's something I really appreciated from the bottom of my heart, you know.
Outstanding. Jazmin, I wish you the best. I mean, you've got a bright future ahead of you again, and I'm glad this worked out the way it did because I think, again, it could have gone a whole bunch of different ways, but it looks like you've got a terrific future ahead of you, and I wish you the absolute best with it.
Thank you.
Ched, it's always good to see you here in the studio, and I know part of what an attorney does is work hard, but I would think it's moments like this that make all those hours, all that hard work worth it. And I just wanted to kind of give you the mic as we close out the episode.
Well, it is, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that Jazmin was able to join us and talk about this because it really was a rewarding case in the sense that we were able to reach our goals, and she has more to reach for, and she's going to. I know that. I feel very confident of that. But that's what I've kept saying. It's been so rewarding. I get a lot of inner reward from being able to help injured workers, especially the most serious like Jazmin, and to basically be able to help them get through their hopefully the traumatic time of their life, but get them back to where they're enjoying life and being productive as workers, families. And I think that's what's really important because work injuries tend to be and are very hard for families to deal with.
Well, it's not only the financial aspect, it's also the emotional and the psychological aspect of, hey, my work life, my career may be totally different going forward. So, I mean, again, you've seen this hundreds and hundreds of times over the years, and you're able to kind of be that steady hand to say, hey, there is hope at the end of this.
Well, I tell everybody when we first get going, my goal is to make sure that their medical benefits are provided, and we've done that. We've reached that goal. And secondly, I try to make sure that they get the fair, disability benefits, their workers' comp, to compensate them for the times when they're for sure unable to work. They can't go to work. I mean, who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to get the check? Who's going to pay for things? And that causes a lot of sleepless nights.
Well, and especially in the situation where games start being played by the insurance adjusters in the company, and that happens more frequently than people would like to admit, I guess.
Well, it does, and that's why it's to me I call it the avoidance game, and not necessarily in this particular case, but generally, it's the rule I try to tell everybody, and I told Jazmin up front: what they don't pay out for you, they get to keep, and that's something I told her in the first call. Then she would help understand, what was happening, why they were doing this or doing that. And we've got too much, not necessarily this case, but we've got too much of the community, the insurance companies, telling the doctors how they should treat people and what they can do or can't do. And we've got too much of them trying to send you to company doctors who's really are indebted to the insurance companies for sending them the business. And they have an ethic to be on the side of the injured worker or their patient, and a lot of times they're not. They're there to take care of the company's business or the insurance company's business.
Well, and the sad fact about this is the injured worker doesn't know all this is going on in the background. They think, okay, the company's taking care of me. They're going to say, okay, they've got somebody for me. And they get railroaded in these ways. And I'm sorry, it's just, it shouldn't happen that way. And Ched, again, you and I have known each other for a long time. You're a very good friend of mine, and I love the fact that I can look at you and say, I know what you do every day for people, especially on behalf of the injured workers right here in Kentucky, and I'm proud to call you my friend because this is really what you do.
I appreciate it. I love it, and we are good friends, and I'm glad you've been able to recognize that and see that.
Absolutely. Friends, I hope you found this episode insightful. This is one of those rare times when I actually get to sit down with not only the attorney, but also his or her client, and to really kind of talk about what that experience is like, what life is like now. after this has been resolved successfully. And it's one of those things that really kind of puts a smile on our face. And I'm just glad to see, 3 people sitting here in the studio. Everybody's smiling because we know this was a job well done. So again, I hope you found this helpful. If you or your family need help, I would invite you to check out JenningsLawOffices.com. Feel free to share this episode, obviously, on your social media so more and more people can find out about it. So as we close out the episode, I'd like to say this is a conversation today with attorney Ched Jennings of the Jennings Law Offices, and this was the Kentucky Workers' Compensation Podcast. It's what you need to know. Thanks for listening to the Kentucky Workers' Compensation Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back soon with more information. In the meantime, if you like what you heard, please consider sharing this on your social media channels. You'll be doing your part to help Ched support injured Kentucky workers.